So now we're recording the session so that we can decide if we want to share it with others who weren't able to make it afterwards. So just so you guys know that. All registrants will be muted if you've been on a Zoom call before. We're not trying to be rude. We're just muting you because when there's background noise or whatever, it messes up and you can't hear the speaker real well. So since we only have an hour and a half, we'll be focusing on, let Rosie in. We will be focusing on some of the most common questions that have been submitted to us by multiple people. And then at the end, if we have time, which I'm a little hesitant to say that we're going to have time, but hopefully we will, then we'll address some of the questions that you guys put in the chat room. If you have a question, please do put it in the chat room. I'm recording the chat room as well, as long as I do that right. And so if you can put your email address in there with it, then if we don't get to your question tonight, I'm going to spend some time over the next couple of days looking at those questions, getting information. If I don't know the answer, going to our panelists and getting that information for you, and I'll email you back with an answer, because I don't think we're going to get to everyone's questions tonight. It's a really big topic for an hour and a half. If you need to leave the presentation before it's over, that's okay. We know everyone has kids and everyone has stuff going on, so that's no big deal at all. So the layout of this Q&A session will be as follows. So I'm going to start with introductions of the panelists so that you can kind of meet our experts and gain an understanding of what questions they might be able to answer for you. Then I will ask the panelists some specific questions based on their expertise. Then we'll get to some of the questions that people emailed me if we have time to do that. And then if time prevails still, we will go to the chat room questions. And again, we won't ignore your questions even if we don't get to them tonight. So sit tight on that. Know that we'll get back to you. So I'll start with introductions. I'll start with myself. If you don't know me, I'm Joni Elfers. I'm the School Age Matters Coordinator for the Down Syndrome Association. Sorry, I forgot to spotlight myself already. I messed up. There we go. I'm really big. But I kind of have three main roles at the Down Syndrome Association. One of the biggest ones is that I go to school meetings, IEP meetings, behavior meetings, whether now that's virtually or in person. That's something that I can do with you to just kind of sit beside you and help work with your team to create the best plan for your child that has Down syndrome, your student that has Down syndrome. So that's kind of one of the biggest things that I do, especially during the school year. I'm busy. I have a really big mileage reimbursement expense check. But then I also can do peer presentations where I go in and talk to classmates of a student that has Down syndrome. That might look a little bit different this year too, but we'll take it as it comes. And I just kind of review what Down syndrome is and then talk about how people with Down syndrome are more like everyone else than they are different. And then the third big part of my role is programming. So programming looks quite different right now. A lot of times we usually have, in-person programming, a bike camp, kitchen classes, cooking classes, art classes, all kinds of things in person. Right now, that's all being done virtually, but we would love to see you connect with us virtually. If you don't know how to do that, shoot me an email and I can get you the information on how to join us virtually. We've done some pretty cool things. I think the thing that I've liked one of the most is the cooking class. They've made some really good meals for their families and they've been pretty proud of themselves too. So, and then mom and dad don't have to cook. So that's been a fun one. But yeah, just shoot me an email and I can get you more information on the virtual stuff. So I will go through each one of our panelists. If you guys could just briefly introduce yourself, then we'll get started on the main questions. So Kelly, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kelly Jones. Ooh, there's a lot of feedback there.
Oh, let me spotlight you. I have to remember to do this. Okay, there you go.
I'm Kelly Jones, and I am, most importantly, mom to Linus, who's 8 years old. We live in Fort Thomas, Kentucky, and I am on the Fort Thomas Independent School District task force for reopening. And I'm also, in my professional side, I'm an early childhood mental health therapist at North Key, and I work on the United Way Resilient Children and Families program.
Great, thank you. Rebecca, would you like to go next? You are
Sure.
muted, by the way. Okay, you're on it.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Shear. I have 3 kids. I have Eden is 11, Wyatt is 9 and will be in 3rd grade, and he has Down syndrome. And Adeline, the tiny tornado, is 5 and will be entering kindergarten. So I'm also an intervention specialist for Cincinnati Public Schools at Hyde Park School, where I am the transition coordinator for the preschool to kindergarten group. So I hold a number of roles, including case coordinator for the building. And I sit on the instructional leadership team, which has helped form what back to school looks like for our school. And then I also sit on the positive behavior intervention support team. So, and then I sit on the board for the Down Syndrome Association, as well as the Educational Advisory Committee. So, or board. Is it committee or board? I always forget.
EAB board,
EAB,
whatever.
yes,
It's fine.
So those are the many hats I wear.
Thank you. Dr. Dice, would you like to go next?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Okay. Sorry, we live out in the sticks and the internet access out here is always questionable. So Mark Dice, I work for Pediatric Associates of Northern Kentucky. I've been with them for 19 years. After residency with my wife here at Cincinnati Children's, I did specialty training in developmental pediatrics. So I've seen children with Down syndrome for the last 25 years. Absolutely, hands down, my greatest love of my professional life. Our practice sees around 45 children with Down syndrome. Again, hands down, favorite thing in my professional life. And that's it. I'm on the health advisory board and on the board of directors at the DSAGC.
Thank you. How about you, Miss Ashley? Let me spotlight you.
Hi, I'm Ashley Barlow. I am the mom to 2 boys. My oldest is going into 8th grade. He is 13, and then my youngest is 10, going into 4th grade. He has Down syndrome. I work as an attorney. Almost my entire practice deals with people with disabilities. So I do divorce work. Almost all the kids, almost all families have at least one child with a disability. I do estate planning work, including special needs estate plans. And then the majority of my practice is special education or just plain education support, due process, et cetera. I go to meetings, all of that stuff. I'm also on the Education Advisory Board.
Thank you. And Miss Gretchen, last but not least.
Hello, I'm Gretchen Carroll. I'm the education specialist in the Thomas Center for Down Syndrome at Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. And I've been working with children with Down syndrome for 15, 20 years now, and with my primary focus on best practice in education and learning, IEP development, behavior, and inclusion strategies. And I've been on the board of the DSAGC and am currently on the Education Advisory Council, and have worked collaboratively with Joni since the day she started.
Which I very, very much appreciate. And those other ones saying that they sit on the Educational Advisory Board, that's my deal at the DSAGC. So I appreciate their support and their input. Couldn't do it without you. So let's dive right into questions since we're kind of tight on time. Let's go to Kelly, Jones, and Rebecca. I don't know how you guys want to do it. I'll let you, do it however you want to. But since both of you guys have sat on the decision-making committees in your districts regarding how back to school is going to look, can you provide us with some information on how these decisions were made? And then just let us know what your district is offering. And I know that's probably changed day by day or week by week, but what is it offering at this moment in time? And what led up to that decision?
It doesn't matter. I can go. It doesn't matter to me.
Minimize me, Joni.
Kelly, I think, has a broader view for the whole district, where I'm more a micro view from a building perspective. And I am required to say that my takeaway from the district is my own takeaway, and I'm not necessarily speaking for Cincinnati Public Schools. They've asked us to say that if we do anything like this. So And so, you know, I've watched all the board meetings and I've been a part of the leadership team. And so I think from my perspective, Cincinnati Public Schools has been fairly cautious in our back to school return policies. They have been waiting, I think, to see if it's safe. And, you know, graciously, I know I'm personally glad that a few weeks ago they made the decision that all children are going to be remote for the first 5 weeks. We are still getting some changing, you know, kind of tweaks to that as we go along. So we are getting some new information regularly. Like I am required to be in the building next week. So I just found that out yesterday. But they've been very cautious. As you know, we have a very large population of children who are in low-income families and are at high risk based on the African-American population. So they've been very cautious with back to school. They are looking at it from a lot of different perspectives, from childcare, from special education to, you know, employees. So putting together partnerships with agencies to provide support for parents who have to work and teachers who have to work they've been bringing information regularly. So we are all remote, and right now we are waiting, kind of in waiting game to hear if that changes. Originally, we were going to be on a blended learning, which is kind of like half the school comes Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then the other half would come alternating Mondays, Thursday, Friday, because there's so many holidays on Monday that they would miss that. Our specialized classrooms were going to be 5 days a week. So if you had a child in a self-contained classroom, they were going to be able to get all the services and supports that they need. Our paraprofessionals are also working remotely. So they will be supporting either if you have a one-on-one or individual paraprofessional, whichever you would like to call it. They are going to be working, you know, remotely as well with your child, and we're making plans and arrangements for that. So we're still kind of waiting to see if anybody else can receive services in person, but that is where we kind of stand now.
Great, thank you. Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I do not represent Fort Thomas Independent School District, so all opinions are my own. So I was asked to be a parent member to represent Johnson Elementary. That's where my 3 kiddos go, and including Linus, who has Down syndrome and has an IEP. So our experience in the spring with NTI was that many service, and as I've talked to other parents in the district who have children on IEPs, were that many services such as therapies were not provided. So we've really pushed to correct that for this year. So Fort Thomas's plan originally was to offer in-person 5 days a week with social distancing measures in place. If you did not feel comfortable with that, or your child had a medical need, you could opt for remote learning through the Edgenuity program. And then once you make that choice, either to be a remote learner or an in-person, they were saying that you may not change that until at least 9 weeks in. So as of yesterday, Governor Beshear, in his press conference, offered a recommendation, not an order, but a recommendation to not start in-person school in Kentucky until the end of September. And Fort Thomas did follow that, and they sent out an email that evening stating that we would not begin we'll begin August 31st with NTI, and then we will not start in person until after the end of September. So they did follow the recommendation of the governor and changed some plans.
And just in case people don't know what NTI is, it's non-traditional instruction.
Yes, so so children will be at home and not in person.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Or did you want?
No, that's kind of the gist of it. They are stating for, there's an entire website for Fort Thomas Independent School District that you can go and look at. That's for their Healthy at School plan, with things ranging from social emotional supports to information on what does this look like, at the elementary, middle school, and high school level. And all the elementary plans are different based on buildings and space. And then the IEP information is more of a please contact your teacher. This is on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and unfortunately, let me stop myself real quick. Unfortunately, there's just not, every district is doing things so differently. So it's really kind of hard to compare and talk to other parents and figure out what's best. And so really working with your school team is going to be quite important, and trying to communicate and collaborate with them. But
Yeah.
one thing that I will say is there's been a lot of thought that it's been put into it. And unfortunately, there's just not an ideal situation for anyone, in my opinion. Maybe your kiddo does awesome virtually, good for you. But most of the families that I work with, it's just been really difficult. So we're all in it together. Dr. Dice, can you let me find you so I can spotlight you? I don't know where you went. Hold on. There you are. All right.
Okay,
So,
can you hear me?
yes.
Okay.
So I'd like to kind of discuss the overall medical concerns for students with Down syndrome when returning to school. So since some schools are returning, and then if you can talk about child transmission rates a little bit, that would be great. Child to child, child to teacher, whatever. And then any other medical issues that you think are important for parents to know, and what parents might be concerned about.
Perfect. So I had a daughter get married over the weekend. That's a bridesmaid dress right there that needs dry clean. So I'm in her quiet room. I'm probably about to be interrupted just for a second. I apologize. Having said that, so I have tried saving emails. We get emails every day about COVID and about what's going on with COVID, what you need to know about COVID, et cetera. Anyhow, getting emails every single day. I've been trying to save those for the last few weeks and have watched those for the last couple of days and tried to consolidate that information. That's what I want to run through right now. So the first thing, this information is no way intended to be either political or religious. One thing that I've been kind of frustrated with the last few weeks is a lot of the information that's coming out is seen as being one or the other. This virus does not care what your political affiliation is, what your religious affiliation is. This is not political, it's not religious. This virus wants to find you and it wants to cause you trouble. I also don't intend to frustrate you, but this information may frustrate you because, not all of it's good news and we all are getting just more than a little tired about all this. So general information. In general, children have a low rate, thankfully, of symptomatic infection. If you look at all the cases of symptomatic infection in the US, children represent less than 10% of symptomatic COVID cases in the US. And in relative terms, compared to the flu, very few children have been admitted and very few have died, thankfully, blessedly. In children who have any sort of immunocompromising disorder, including Down syndrome and heart disease, there's no apparent increased risk for the infection severity or complications relative to COVID. This is, a little bit conflicting information. I was looking at Children's website today, and there's a few things on there. And I'll close with a comment that we know more about this virus right now, but we don't know everything about this virus right now. So information's changing, and it's changing quickly. Literally at 6 o'clock tonight, I tuned into a webinar with Children's about what's the latest and greatest on COVID. That's how fast things are changing. We used to get, truly got emails every 15 minutes. Now it's about 3 times a day. It's not, quite as robust as what it was. One thing to understand is that even though we say that kids who have immunocompromising conditions, including Down syndrome, have a lesser infection rate, one thing that may confound that is that parents obviously are probably more vigilant in their protection of their kids. So a little bit hard to figure out the real statistics. Infection rates vary by age, but depending on which study you look at, this information is variable. So the current data suggests that children over 10 years of age have a much higher likelihood of transmitting COVID than do younger children. So important to think about when you send your kids back to school, if kids go back to school. That's an issue for down the road. Children over 10 are also therefore much more likely to transmit COVID to other family members if they become infected. Under 10, less likely to transmit to the family. Over 10, greater likelihood of transmitting to the family. Hard to understand because what do kids do? They stick their fingers up their noses and they get viruses and they shed things. So if this was flu or cold, they're going to transmit it. They're really good at transmitting that. If it's COVID, for some reason, they don't seem to transmit it. Household transfer of the virus is what most likely is currently driving the spread of disease, and the spread of disease has definitely ticked up in the last few weeks. In our office, about 3 weeks ago, we had 4 positive cases. Now we have over 32. We take care of 21,000 kids in Northern Kentucky, and therefore, I think we're pretty representative. We're the largest single specialty practice in the entire state of Kentucky, so pretty representative. And the rate of daycare center transfer is very uncertain for anybody that is worried about that. We are seeing a definite increase in cases recently. I love this. One person compared it to a high school group project. So basically, you've got a couple of people that are working really hard to do what they should be doing, and everybody else is doing nothing. And ergo, the rate of transfer is increasing greatly. And another great analogy was somebody said, this is all about bars and beaches. So bars, if you go to restaurants, if you go to bars or restaurants, you're not paying any attention, you're the problem. If you have cut loose your life and you're going to beaches and carrying on with your vacations and doing everything that you want to do, you're the problem right now. And I can tell you, I've been into some gas stations in the last few weeks. I walk in, not a single stitch of face mask on in those places. I want to scream. I am so angry when I see that. I have a daughter with leukemia. I am doing everything I can to keep her safe. And when I see that, I feel like, you selfish, fill in the blank, put your mask on, get over it. I'm so done with you. Anyhow, sorry. Okay, school policies, obviously highly variable. The county health department in your district has the final say in all policy development, and their rules will trump anything else. I'm not using the word trump loosely or for any other reason, but they basically have the ultimate authority over any other regulations. Whatever you want, whatever's in your IEP, if it's not what the health department in your district says, doesn't matter. Prevention. With regard to masks, masks are absolutely the most important measure that we can all take, with social distancing being number 2. Masks primarily prevent others from you, not so much you from them, but if 2 people mask and maintain social distancing, the likelihood of transmission and infection is very low. Children over the age of 5 should definitely be masked, and if cooperative over the age of 2, masking is probably smart. We'll get to that. Data has shown that the transfer of the virus in hospital settings is greatly reduced when appropriate PPE is worn. So I've heard people say, like, I don't want to associate with a healthcare provider because obviously they're at increased risk. I would argue actually we're at somewhat decreased risk because for the most part, everybody's taking it very seriously. And I love there was an example of 2 hairdressers apparently who developed symptomatic COVID. They both wore face masks. They did not define which face mask they wore. So important things. You can either wear an N95, you can wear a surgical mask, you can wear a cloth mask. They didn't define this, but these 2 people developed symptomatic COVID. They had had contact with over 100 people between them in the days prior to their infection when they were probably infectious, and they did not transfer to a single soul because they wore their face masks. Very important issues with masks. Teachers absolutely positively need to be masked, primarily, again, for their own safety, not so much for the safety of the kids. With respect to schools, distancing teachers and children is critical. For anybody who has concerns about low oxygen and high carbon dioxide levels and that being caused by the mask, it's the most preposterous thing I've ever heard. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what anybody says they've proven. The pores of cloth masks are enormous compared to gas molecules like oxygen, and there is no way that diffusion doesn't occur. If there was an issue with that, think about surgeons who operate sometimes for 18 hours in a row with a face mask on their face. They wouldn't be able to exist. And if you want a great example, there's an American athlete named Galen Rupp who has horrible allergies and wears a face mask every time he competes, and he's won national championships and has set national records, all with a face mask on his face. If you think that, low oxygen levels, high carbon dioxide levels are an issue, forget it. It's ridiculous. Sorry. If any of this makes you aggravated, been dealing with this for about 5 or 6 months. My aggravation level is a pretty all-time high right now. Okay, if your child will absolutely not wear a face mask, a face shield will provide some additional protection, but face shields are not nearly as effective as masks. And we'll come back to that. Face masks aren't political, they're life-saving. Again, prevention measures. Distancing kids from each other is also helpful. The current recommendation is that they be distanced by 5 feet. If that can't happen, if there are barriers in place, 3 feet probably is effective. This has everything to do with the distance that basically vapor particles come out of your mouth and nose when you're talking, breathing, sneezing, etc. And that's that. Hand washing and sanitizing, very important to do symptom screening. If you have any doubts, quarantine. If you have no idea if you're infectious, you have a headache, you have sore throat, you have a runny nose, you have cough, you have whatever, quarantine. Be sensible. If we all did this, this thing would not go away, but it would be so greatly diminished, it'd be ridiculous. Next thing is maximize ventilation. In our area, that's a little bit tougher to do because, we're experiencing good weather right now. We're going to quickly turn into wintertime, and, it's not going to be possible to send kids outside to instruct them outside, probably come October, November. Smaller groupings of children, also very helpful. And I think this is incredibly important. Caution and careful planning during transition times, such as change of classes, is incredibly important. I've had the blessing of seeing 3 school principals in the last few weeks, and they've basically all said that they have no idea what they can possibly do because the CDC guidelines are such that if they have kids transfer rooms, not teachers, they have to re-sanitize the room. Number one, it's going to take forever, so your kids' educational time is going to be cut down. And 2, I don't know how they're going to keep ahead of supplies if they have to do that. 3, to me, it's just completely impractical and unwieldy. But, transition times are going to be a huge deal with this whole thing. How do you get your kids ready for school? If possible, practice with them. Practice what your school is going to look like when they go back to school in your district, and help your child learn to wear a face mask. Think of the other hurdles that most of you have probably faced. You've had to teach your kids how to wear glasses, hearing aids, CPAP masks, all those things. It takes time. You can't decide 3 days before school starts, hey, we need to figure out a way to help you learn to wear a face mask. Have them wear a mask for 10 seconds, then 20 seconds, then 30 seconds, and praise the heck out of them for doing those things. Next thing, I apologize. I live out in the sticks, and I'm having a heck of a time connecting tonight. I had a bunch of websites that I wanted to share with you, and that's really my last thing. Happy to answer any questions at the end, and I know there were a couple of medical questions that came in, but I want to keep this brief because I've got a feeling this is going to be more about the educational side of things and not so much about the health side of things. So happy to answer any questions that you have at the end.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of great information. Wish we had more time for you to talk more about it. Regarding your websites, so at the end of this, probably won't come until tomorrow or Friday because I'm gonna wait and compile everything that I get from all of the panelists. They might have things that they think would be helpful for you. I know I have 3 documents that I'd like to share with you. And so I will compile those and then send out an email to everyone so everyone can get the websites and the documents and everything that that will hopefully help you. So let me turn it over to Ashley. Ashley, I'm not going to ask all the individual questions. I'm just going to let you dive into kind of some of the things that we talked about that we know our audience is going to want to hear. So let me find you and spotlight you. There you are.
Okay, I'm going to pull that up. I'll open up your Word document, so I've got it open. Okay, awesome. I'm probably glazed over for a second. Okay, so the first thing that Joni wanted for me to talk about is the way that I advise my clients. It's like the tagline of my law practice. And it's reason, respect, and grace. So I actually, if you go to my website, it's the very first blog post that I wrote on there, and that's pretty intentional. But so reason. I always tell my clients, I advise them under the shadow of the law. So if somebody comes to me and says, I want this in my IEP, my first thought is, what do I think a judge would do, an administrative law judge would do if that was requested? And, you know, I always tell people if the law was very simple and cut and dry, attorneys wouldn't have jobs. So everything kind of lies between within parameters, right? And so what I like to do is I like to think, where do I think a judge would lie? Is it here or here? Is it 10 hours or is it 30 hours? Whatever it is. And then see within that space what is yesable for my client, what we can tolerate or what we can tweak in order to make something tolerable. So reasonable to me means what is tolerable within the law. Respect. I think if you are looking for a good resource on how to be respectful, a great spot to start would be on rightslaw.com, which is WRIGHTSLAW.com. Pete Wright and Pam Wright, his wife, have this great website. The search box is like the key to the website. And if you typed in letter to a stranger, you would find a way to be respectful. So what Pete describes, and it's kind of the grace in it too, the advocacy part, but you don't get very far if you are adversarial from the start. Now, I believe in conflict. I love conflict. I always say conflict yields effective change. I love conflict, but we can approach conflict respectfully. We don't have to scream. We don't have to get frustrated. It's extremely difficult to do that with your own child. Take it from me, I'm not super good at it with my own child. So sometimes that means bringing somebody else to a meeting, Joni or Gretchen or an advocate, an attorney, somebody else to the meeting, but being respectful. So what Pete says in this letter to a stranger is when you're communicating with the district, act as though you're communicating with a judge. The best way to stay out of court is to prepare as though you're going to court. And I think that's great advice because it kind of puts you in this mentality that reminds you that a judge could be looking at something. So, you know, sometimes it's posturing to ask questions instead of like saying statements. Sometimes it is explaining your interest and values instead of getting stuck in a position. Like I want a one-on-one IA and I'm gonna get stuck on a one-on-one IA. But rather talking about what your concerns are, where your interests lie, and the why behind your position. And then grace to me is the way that I choose to advocate. I choose to advocate with a style that is reasonable and respectful, and it doesn't sneak up on somebody. So if you advocate from that why, from your interest and your values, then the graceful advocacy kind of comes back in. But sometimes, you know, there is a strategy and you've got to make sure that the strategy isn't disrespectful. So, you know, all of that is grace to kind of like look at the end and say, all right, how am I going to do this without just cramming it down people's throats? And I think that's really important. I think the reason Joni wanted for me to talk about it tonight is because we have federal guidance that says that no matter what we're doing, if we're learning at home, if we're learning on a third-party commercialized platform, if we're learning from our teachers, if we're learning in person, wherever we're learning and from whomever we're learning, we have to do it with flexibility. So as we're interpreting IEPs, we have to do it with flexibility. We have to look to see, you know, what's reasonable. And my word's reasonable, the federal government in this case is saying flexible. The next bullet point for me is can I discuss FAPE in this current COVID world? And so, yeah, I mean, what Joni actually wrote me a little cheat sheet here. So what the United States Department of Ed has said is, and it's OSEP underneath the Department of Ed, but they have said that we should use a good faith effort and that we should be reasonable and flexible. So those kinds of words. And that kind of goes toward what is reasonable. What I have recommended, and I think this is probably a good time to talk about this, I'm just flipping over to see if Joni wanted for me to talk about it now, is that everybody go through their IEP with 3 colored pens, and that they read every single word, present levels, goals, accommodations, modifications, program supports for personnel, all of those things. And if you can't do it, if it's impossible to do, highlight it in red. And then think, okay, do we want to let it go? If we want to let it go, what do we need to have in place in order to like maybe change it? Like what would want to revive this, and how could we revive this goal? If it is yellow, it means that it could happen in the learning platform that's happening right now, but it's going to need some tweaking. So like my example of that is, an example of red is my child gets Orton Gillingham reading, and to do that with fidelity at his age level and his reading level, he should have 90 minutes of OG per week. Well, he can't access in-person learning, and I cannot do OG training at home. He cannot condition himself to video instruction, and so that's impossible. It's red. It can't happen. But in my case, it's actually yellow because I'm kind of sunny optimistic. That's why I wear pink pom-poms. It's intentional. And so I'm like, okay, well, what supports can you give me to make something that's OG-like? And let's see if he makes progress. And between May and now, he has increased in 2 reading levels. And in 5 years of public education, he was only an emerging first grade reader. So like, it's worked beautifully. And it's not me, it's environment and lots of other things. But I mean, it's working. So I turned a red into a yellow with pink pom-poms. So, but a yellow thing for him might be, our school has iPads. Well, he's got a typing goal. I'm not going to facilitate a typing goal on an iPad, because if he were at school, he would get a keyboard, because there are desktop computers in schools. We don't have a keyboard on a computer in our house that's not attached to something that we need for work. And Jack can't touch things that we need for work. So I'm just going to ask for a keyboard. You know, that's yellow, but if you give me this keyboard, it turns into a green. I can do it at home. Give me, you know, a $15 keyboard. Life moves on. Then green is, this can happen any place. And I think it's important to kind of talk about those things. So that's kind of looking at the flexibility, looking at the reason. And then of course, the part that I really never want to forget about is, how am I going to ask for this? What am I going to do? How am I going to be flexible? Show them that I want to be flexible, and then gracefully advocate for it. So those are real life examples of how to do that. The next question is the number 1 question. How can you discuss related service? Can I please discuss related services as well as one-on-one paras or IAs or teacher's assistants, and what parents' rights are? So related services first, that is PT, speech, OT, music therapy, those great folks. So I think what's important is that we recognize that there is a public health concern, a public health argument that is underlying to all of these discussions, and something that I can't imagine. My practice was a general practice when I purchased it. And I pretty quickly narrowed it down, but I have liability experience. I have general civil experience. And what I can't believe is that insurance companies, that nobody's on the Today Show saying, I wrote the policy for New York City public schools and that they shall not X, Y, and Z. Because the liability is so significant. I mean, I thought Dr. Dice just did a phenomenal job being very objective about what research tells us about COVID-19. And so I'm really surprised that more schools aren't like, our insurance company won't let us, or our attorney has advised us that the liability would be so significant that this isn't reasonable. So, you know, what does that mean for, can I get para support? Can I get speech, PT, OT, etc.? It means it has to be reasonable. So make a request. At the very heart, at the very end of the day, you are entitled to your IEP as it's written now. You are entitled to every minute that's in that IEP. But the first thing that I'll say to that is that so what happens in a school is not anything close to what happens when you're learning at home, or when you're learning in a blended scenario or a synchronous scenario or any other scenario. So like, one example is, you know, people have asked me about one-on-one IAs, and I've said, well, I don't think 8 hours is reasonable. I seriously don't think 8 hours is reasonable. If you're asking for 8 hours, what you're asking for is childcare. Because if you do exactly what somebody does in school, even with let's take my typical 8th grader, and I give him the exact same instruction, the same words come out of my mouth at the same pace that his teachers give him, we could probably do it in 60% of the amount of time that he would do it in an in-person learning situation at school. You wait on adults to finish conversations at school. You wait on your peers to go to the bathroom at school. You wait in line at the cafeteria at school. You finish ahead of other people, and you wait for other people to finish your assignments at school. Blah, 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 blah. Those are all incredible things. That's our inclusion argument. That's what we want to learn. If you can wait for somebody to go to the bathroom at school, then you can wait in line at Potbelly Deli with your mom without pulling the lady's hair in front of you. So those are good skills that we learn. That's inclusion. But learning at home is, in theory, more efficient. Another thing is, you might not want those people in your house all day if it's an IA argument, an assistant argument. So I don't think there's a magic number, like 70% of the time or 60% of the time or something like that. But I don't think 100% of the time is a valid question. I think what you should look at is, okay, so I need help at home, and here's why I need help at home, and look at the real reasons, right? Like, my kid objectively won't work for me. Take some videos, show data or evidence that says that my kid won't work for me. My kid can't condition for video learning. Okay, well, show evidence of you trying to do that. So, and then think, okay, what is this day gonna look like? How much time can we reasonably expect to be doing whatever work we need support with? And then how can that support look? Something that one of my clients is doing that I think is awesome is they are doing para support electronically, remotely. I have a friend who has a remote babysitter. The babysitter lines up crafts and games and whatnot, and they play on FaceTime, and the babysitter can entertain their girls. It's like so unfair. I'm like, why didn't I get girls? They can do stuff all day long on, well, for 3 hours, honest to Pete, on a FaceTime. So that's kind of cool. So think about it that way. Speech, PT, and OT, I think is, you know, maybe a little bit of an easier argument. I still think that there is a valid request to ask for in-person therapy services, particularly if you're working on things where you need the person to touch your child, and talk about, you know, kind of Mark's point about use of PPE. But as Becca said in the beginning, some districts just simply aren't going to be allowed to do that. So then what you have to do is you have to pivot. Like, we pivoted when we had kids. Like Mark said, we taught them how to wear hearing aids. We taught them how to wear glasses. For some of them, we taught them how to breathe. We can do this. We just have to pivot. We have to think, okay, so that's a no. And I understand it's a no, it's a hard no, but like, no isn't no. No isn't no to me. What else can we do? And we're going to have to think outside the box. The best, most heartwarming example I have is I have a client who is visually impaired, really, really, really impaired vision. And his teacher, so he can't really access learning on a computer screen because it has to be so big that he has to like move it to read, and it's really hard. And he uses Braille for reading. So his teachers would come and write on a storm door, and they would communicate. They could hear one another, and the teachers would be all bundled up in March and just writing backwards on that storm door. And it was like the coolest thing ever. So we can do this. I'm absolutely certain. If there are more questions about the one-on-one para, I usually take like 20 minutes to answer that, but I don't want to be a time hog. I want everybody else, the other questions are also important. So amending an IEP, you know, a lot of you asked, should I allow them to amend my IEP? And so this is a really simple kind of 4-step solution. I don't know if it's 4, we'll count. First thing I would say is, no, I really don't want to amend the IEP. However, happy to document it in the PR01 or the conference summary or the prior written notice, depending on what state you're in. But I'd be happy to document the changes that we agree to in those documents. And so we'll talk about compensatory education in a second, but basically if you do it that way, then it leaves your current IEP in place, what you should be entitled to, and it kind of sets you up for those compensatory services or compensatory monies in order for you to kind of get back to the place that you would have been in had COVID not occurred, or had distance learning not occurred, or whatever you want to, however you want to look at it. So try to say no. If they say, oh gosh, well, we need more than just putting it in a conference summary, then say, well, I know some schools are doing something called a distance learning plan. Could we write some other document and call it something like a distance learning plan or a COVID specific plan or something kind of like a 504 that would say, we know that we've got this goal and we're going to try to do it this way. And you could even put in, remember when I talked about yellow and red in your IEP, you could even put in some of the parameters that say, this is what I want to talk about, or like, this is what has to happen in order for us to revisit this. Data has to go to this number for 3 weeks consecutively or whatever. So try a distance learning goal or a distance learning plan. Then the third thing is if they insist on changing the IEP, again, like life happens. None of us could anticipate that COVID happened. We all have work stuff. We all have life stuff. Like, okay, there's a global health pandemic and it is time to be collaborative. So I think under certain circumstances, it is okay to amend the IEP temporarily. However, what I would not do it unless you absolutely agreed and you had it in writing that the last in-person IEP was going to be the IEP that you went to as a baseline in order to look at the next in-person IEP. So the next time we go in person, or the next time that we dump this blended plan, or the next time we leave whatever we're doing in our district, or with my particular child, we're going back to our February of 2018, sorry, 19, I'm terrible at math, 2019 plan. And then in that meantime, get lots and lots and lots and lots of resources from Joni and Gretchen and anybody else that's in your network about inclusion. Because if your kids are in a small environment because of COVID, they might make better progress. And so we need to then go back and have kind of that least restrictive environment discussion because you don't want data to skew that. So then the last thing is compensatory education. What is comp ed? Why do we get it? And how do we get it, I think is the big question. So districts look at comp ed like it's punitive. What comp ed is it is simply either services or money to be used to achieve services that are intended to get a child back to a position that the child would have been in had a service not been delivered, or in the event that a child has significant regression. So you can get it for 2 things. 1, you don't get a service at all. Or 2, you get a service, but it's so insufficient that regression has occurred. I finally asked a mom if I could share a story because I've got a great story about no services at all. And I have changed it to protect the identity of the child. But let's say that there's a goal that a child is going to work on the skill of buttoning and unbuttoning clothes. Well, we asked for data in a meeting and the OT said, Mom never sent the kid with a button. And so I could have never worked on that goal. And it was like, wait a minute, are you kidding me? Like, I literally said, have you ever heard of Melissa and Doug? I mean, like, for real, like, you're an OT, you don't have a board with buttons and such. And so they got no time. What we got then was probably money. I can't really remember. You could either get money or you could agree to time with the school's OT to make up for that lost time. Now, it's not dollar for dollar or minute for minute. What it is it's money that, or time that you would expect would get the child in the position that the child would have been in had the instruction been either delivered or delivered in a way to make progress. So then the other option, the other time that you get it is regression. We see that a lot with reading. You know, we think a child's going to master a sight word list, and you know, we're on the 2nd grade sight word list and we're in 8th grade and we've been working on it since 5th. So in that case, we reasonably expected for the child to have mastered it in the 5th grade. And now here we are at the end of 8th, we still haven't done it. We still aren't blending, whatever the reading thing is. And so we can ask for comp ed time for that. And that would either be extra time with special ed that doesn't take away from the school day, or money so that you can go take that money to a tutor to get the reading instruction. The last thing I'll say about it is how to get it. And what I would say is, remember, schools see it as punitive. So I, in my practice model, reason, respect, and grace, would not file due process immediately. What I would do is I would write a letter. I would explain it at the end, the letter to a stranger way, very deliberately with a very respectful tone. And I would request a meeting in the letter, at the end of the letter, so that they know my interests, my values, and my positions. And then I would go in the meeting and have further conversation about it and make the request. If the request isn't granted, then I would file a due process complaint. But right now there's money for comp ed. It's not earmarked in Kentucky, Indiana, or Ohio yet. Hopefully we'll get some earmarked money soon, but there is money through a variety of different federal programs that are COVID specific. And the federal government, OSEP, OSERS, the Federal Department of Education, Kentucky and Ohio, and I didn't check Indiana, but I'm certain they have, departments of education have all said, sometimes education's not gonna happen. And if that happens, you'll be entitled to comp ed. So, you know, they're saying schools are going to give it to us. We can't be victimized for, or not the opposite of victimized. We can't be villainized for asking for it, right? So that was a mouth load. That was a lot, but hopefully I was fast enough. I was trying to give a lot of information.
That was great. Thank you. I have to say, I'm really proud of you for sticking to the time frame. Ashley has a lot of very important things to say, and she's a talker, and so she did a great job. So now I'd like to turn it over to Gretchen Carroll. Let me find you, Gretchen. And again, I'm not going to go through and ask all these specific questions.
That's
I'll just
fine.
let you dive in and talk about what you're talking about. Thank you.
Okay, so in the last 25 minutes, the 2 areas that I'm going to talk about are some kind of practical strategies for those of you who are going to be at least starting the year with virtual learning, and specifically ones that have real good efficacy with kids with Down syndrome. And then I want to talk about progress monitoring, because that ties so directly into making sure the plan and the IEP is appropriate. So those are the 2 areas. I'm actually going to try to share a screen. So you'll have to let me know if this works. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep, we see strategies to make online learning more successful.
Okay, so obviously for many of us, the spring was challenging to say the least. The benefit, hopefully, of this coming school year is that schools have had more time to prepare, and that many are going to try a more very specific, organized online virtual model. So the way that I approach everything really in my practice and in my clinical work is to be as kind of practical and functional as possible. So given the limited time we have, when you are thinking about ways to make online learning, virtual learning, hybrid virtual learning as appropriate and meaningful as possible, I take kind of a 3-pronged approach. So the first is looking at the work. What are we going to ask our kids to do? If that's not appropriate, the whole thing falls apart. So beginning with the work. The second focus is really looking at the delivery of the instruction and the output required by the child. And then because behavior can be such a particular challenge for many of our kids, especially in the virtual home model, I want to talk a little bit about how you can add behavior supports to maximize positive outcomes. So in terms of the first approach, looking at the curriculum and the assignments, one of the things I think we've hit upon, but I'm going to drill in terms of importance, is I highly recommend, and I'm sure that Ashley and Joni agree, that you request an IEP meeting at the very beginning of the school year, or if possible, even prior to the school year. Some schools have already begun, but that is within your right, and actually it's appropriate, particularly if you're going to be not attending, your child's not attending in person. So even if it's not around the annual review time of your IEP, that you request that meeting. And in that meeting, one of the things you talk about is the curriculum and the assignments, so the work. And in my experience helping a lot of families prepare for this coming year and trying to coach some families through a really difficult spring, one of the first things that you want to do is ask the teachers to prioritize the skills and assignments. And that's both the regular education team and the intervention specialists. So really trying to figure out what are our goals, what are our priorities in terms of learning in this virtual model. This is the time where it's appropriate to minimize the non-essential tasks or the busy work. And I'm not at all suggesting that we lower the bar or do not provide our kids with Down syndrome with meaningful, rigorous, appropriate work, but this is not the time for our kids to be doing word searches or copying words multiple times or coloring sheets where you're searching for letters of the alphabet, unless it is meaningfully connected to what we want our children to achieve and to grow and progress. In my opinion, that should not be what we're prioritizing now. So in that meeting, hopefully at the beginning of the school year, it's helpful to talk through each of the goals and the objectives and to request materials and examples to support you if you or someone in your home, whether it's a spouse or a partner or a family member, is the one who's really supporting and engaging that virtual model. If your child's on a more synchronous model where the teacher's on the screen, presumably whether they're using Google Classroom or whatever format, you're going to be getting work in that capacity. But you may not be getting the correct materials that you need or examples to support the IEP goals, which you might be collecting data on, which I'll talk about in a minute. So it's okay to request some of those examples of materials so that you have more data to help you be the one that's supporting those IEP goals in the virtual model. That second approach is to look at the delivery and the output required. And one thing we know really fairly clearly by lots of research and tons of hands-on practical experience is we know that individuals with Down syndrome tend to be stronger in the visual channel. So visual processing, visual memory tend to be much stronger than auditory memory. So this is an opportunity that sometimes we don't always get in in-person school to try to have more access for visual, hands-on, tactile learning. That is one potential benefit of a virtual model where a parent or someone in the family is working more directly with the child in the home. So for example, if you've had that meeting and one of the goals is doing computation or addition for maybe a first grader or a second grader. And in the school setting, maybe the primary method they would use would be a number line, and they would, use the number line to do addition. Well, in the home setting, you can count forks, you can count raisins, you can count the stairs when you go up, up to bed. So there are more tactile objects to use in the home setting that are visual and that can really help with that retention. Another element that's really important in delivery in the virtual model is shortening tasks if needed with more physical and mental breaks. For some kids that I work with, we do things like if it happens to be a model where you're given a lot of worksheets or even tasks on a computer, if it's a worksheet, we will cut it in half or cut it in thirds, or we will block out if it's on a screen and there's 10 math problems, we will cover up 5. So we're doing small sections at a time with more breaks. Changing the output required is one of the most important things that we can do for kids with Down syndrome who have particular difficulties, for example, with fine motor skills or handwriting. I'm often called into schools for behavior concerns, and often when I observe the child for a few hours, what I note is that it's not the task, it's not the learning skill that's the difficulty, it's often the output that's required of the child. So for example, the activity in kindergarten might be identifying consonant sounds. And so there are pictures and you're supposed to look at a picture and find all the words that start with T, for example, and then you're supposed to write the consonant on the line below or next to it. And a lot of times it's the writing that's the challenge, and that causes the tearing up of the paper and the crying and the frustration. So if you're working in that virtual home environment, ask yourself, what is this task working on? So if it's knowing a consonant sound, if it's figuring out an addition problem, if it's defining a vocabulary word, ask yourself if you can change the output to really focus on the skill. Can the child point to the letter of the consonant? Can they draw a line from a math problem to a number rather than writing the number? Can they act something out? Can they jump on the floor to a certain answer, to a certain number? That can help with focus and motivation and endurance. Obviously many of us who are negotiating the virtual model in the spring, we work full-time, we work part-time. To a certain extent, you don't have a lot of choice about when or how you're delivering support, but it is a time that if you can do non-traditional locations for challenging tasks. I had parents who were bouncing the ball outside when they were doing math facts. I had parents who, when the child was taking their bath, were using shaving cream on the side of the tub to work on writing letters. I had families doing things in the kitchen. I suggested, putting sight words on common objects in the home and having races where you'd say a word and they'd have to run to the note card and pull it off. Similarly, you can use game boards. So if you have a Candyland board around the house, or Chutes and Ladders for those rote tasks, reading sight words, doing math facts, where the child reads a few words and then they take their turn, or they do a few math facts and then take their turn. I think it's really important. I think one of the questions that came into Joni was about, for some of our children who have difficulty with speech, and in the virtual model, there's this expectation, certainly if it's synchronous, that you're going to have all the kids on the Zoom call and they'll be able to participate, or they'll be able to share information. Well, for a lot of our kids, they may be able to demonstrate knowledge of the skill, but maybe not through speaking. And they also may not be able to process the instruction fast enough, so they miss those opportunities to participate or share information. So that's something that can also be talked about in that IEP meeting, where you make a plan. How is my child who maybe has a communication device, how is she going to participate in a predictable, meaningful way in that virtual modality? And that is something that can be planned. It can be shared with classmates, it can be shared with the related services providers, but sometimes that's something that we forget, and our kids are left out of that more meaningful participation in the classroom. And as I'm sure many of you have experienced as parents of kids with special needs and not with special needs, behavior is a challenge. As we've said, for decades, learning at school is not the same as learning at home, and how children relate to teachers can be fundamentally different than how they relate to parents. So behavioral challenges are taking on a new intensity for many of us with the virtual learning. So one of the ways to do that, again, I'm going back to that, having that meeting before the school year begins or very early, asking previous teachers, current teachers, for specific behavior strategies that have worked, and then trying to duplicate those as best you can in the home setting. Was there a behavior chart that worked really well? Was there a prize bin that the teacher utilized that was very motivating for the child? Can you replicate some of those exact things so they are similar and encourage appropriate behavior in the home setting? For some of our younger kids, the first then approach, so it can be very basic, a big page a big yellow page and a big green page, and we're going to put something on the yellow page. That's what we're going to do first. And then after that, then we're going to pick a less challenging task or a more preferred task for the child. Picture schedules can be helpful for kids that can do more tasks at a time. But again, you have picture or word cues that show exactly what the tasks are going to be with built-in breaks noted. Providing limited choices. You know, one of my strong beliefs in working with kids with Down syndrome for many, many years is that some of the problematic behavior comes directly because our kids don't have a lot of control. I feel a lot of our kids do not have a lot of control over the day in and day out in their lives. So some of that entrenched, I'm not going to do it, comes from I want to have control. So providing some choices. Do you want to do this math task or this math task? Do you want to sit in the beanbag and do reading, or would you rather do, you know, writing on the chalkboard? Giving kids some limited, not 17 choices, but 2 or 3 with visual cues can give more of that control to the child. And then across all of these behaviors, these behavior modifications, I'm a big believer in using a reward. I call it a reward menu. And that could be done on a computer with pictures. It can be done with small pictures that you laminate and Velcro. The key is that it changes as your child's desires and motivations change. So kids can be motivated by different things on different days. If you have a menu and it's visual, and you're using that, you know, in that synchronous, or if even it's asynchronous, whatever your virtual model is, we're going to complete this. What reward menu, what break menu, what reward are you going to select? And it can be the kind of traditional snacks. It can be on a technology device, 15 minutes on the TV or on a tablet. It can also be more untraditional things where you get to text grandma and tell her what a great day you're having, or you can go outside and ride your bike. There are a whole host of elements that we can use on the reward menu that can be motivating and help get kids through the endurance of a virtual learning experience. And even though all of those were, of course, about a virtual model, I just wanted to touch base on some things I think that are really important for those of you who've made the choice to do the in-person learning. And for those of you, you know, for the schools that have just recently decided to stay home for 5 weeks and then they're going to go in person, it's going to look very different for our kids who are going to school because of the safety precautions. So one thing that can be very successful is using social stories, videos, and modeling to prepare for the safety measures that are implemented in schools. There's really good social stories about mask wearing. You can also ask your teacher if the classroom is going to look really different. Can she take a video? Can she take a video of herself wearing a mask? Can you model, if you know that kids are not going to be able to touch each other or high five, can you model how that's going to look? For some of our kids who don't like changes in routine, school is going to be very different because some schools are implementing programs where the kids will stay in a room most of the day and teachers will cycle through. They're not going to be eating in the cafeteria. Can you do a little video or a little social story about that and then read those and share those as you're ramping up for the school year and even in the beginning of the school year, so there's more comfort around those changes. In that IEP meeting at the beginning of the year, you may need to see if you need new goals or different goals or behavior strategies to assist with the changes. For example, maybe the behavior plan really needs to have a key element of extending the comfortable of wearing a mask or for longer periods of time. And then finally, certainly for older kids, one of the questions that I think came in from a high schooler, you know, some of our kids, our high school, middle schoolers are losing their sports, they're losing their activities. Some of our kids are losing their work plans, at least for the fall. So they're not going on the bus, they're not going to Walgreens, they're not going to Kroger, they're not going to practice skills at a restaurant. Can you work collaboratively team to try to discuss, are there other things we could do? Could we substitute some activities where we meet at parks with masks and do social distancing? Can there be a work environment that we add to a school setting? So can your student help out in the office? Or can they use community partners in safe, isolated settings to still have those opportunities? So those are some strategies for making both virtual and online better. And then I've got one more thing I'd like to share about progress monitoring. I don't think progress monitoring, can you see?
We see you now.
Oh, you see me now? Okay. All right. All right. I will share this. I have a, let me see if I can get it up. Share screen. Progress monitoring. Okay. Now, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So because we really need to collect data in a way that we haven't before, I want to just touch really quickly. This will be my last area of focus on progress monitoring. And back to that very important meeting at the beginning of the year, one of the things you want to discuss really specifically is data tracking and progress monitoring. And a part of that is really specifically defining who's going to be collecting data. And so, for example, if you're in a synchronous model, so that means your child will be presumably on technology kind of in live time, many of our kids are going to actually have time, virtual time with their intervention specialist. Or for some of our families, some of the kids are actually going to be able to go to the school and work with their intervention specialist in the school setting. In either of those scenarios, it's most likely that the intervention specialist will continue to collect the data as they did last year when our kids were attending school in person. And then you would get those progress monitoring reports. But for those programs that are less synchronous, and it's possible that it could be that part of that data collection falls to you as the parent when you're working on those academic skills. So in that meeting, talk through each of the IEP goals and think about who's going to be tracking that. And if you don't feel comfortable tracking a specific kind of skill, you need to share that with the team so there is someone who would be able to track that data. I think it's a very reasonable request to consider more frequent progress reporting. Typically we get our IEP progress reports maybe every 10 weeks. I think because these are such extraordinary times, it's appropriate to ask maybe at a 5-week interval, at least for the beginning of the school year, so you can make some decisions about whether this is you're going on the right course. Is your child progressing? And when you're looking through each IEP goal, you will figure out that some of the goals and some of the skills are easy to track, relatively easy to track in the virtual model, and others may not be. So for example, and this goes along with actually talking about that kind of green, yellow, red approach to looking at the IEP. So I've got a family that I'm working with, and one of the reading goals is a Dolch word list. This is a first grader. So one of the goals is to have a certain accuracy in reading the kindergarten Dolch word list. Well, that's something that a parent with training and with help could probably be tracking. But this child also has a social goal currently on their IEP where they will approach peers and engage in a conversation. Well, there may be siblings at home, but siblings are not the same as peers, and that might be a goal that can't be tracked or done in the same way in the virtual model. And here's an example of a simple chart that you could make and then duplicate on a sheet of paper, where if you are the one that's tracking, you could put the date, the time spent on the task, the skill, and the proficiency. And even if you're not great at math, that could be, we worked on the Dolch word list and, you know, she got 15 out of 18 correct or 6 out of 10 correct. And the note section is important because, remember, one of the reasons we're progress monitoring is to figure out, is this working? Do we need to make changes? So if the notes happen to be, these words were way too difficult, it was highly frustrating, she knew very few of them, I had to review them multiple times for there to be any accuracy, well, that's data that needs to drive what's going on in the educational plan. So if you have this kind of in a log where you're just filling this out as if you're the one who's collecting data, that can be helpful. I think it's helpful to put data to date and keep work samples in a binder. And then finally, taking videos on a cell phone to track progress or skills can also be a really reasonable thing to be doing. And there's just one more thing I'm going to try to share. This is another thing that you can log. One of the big, one of the most disappointing things that I think I saw, and I would imagine that Ashley and Joni had a similar experience with some of their families, and part of this was just the chaos of the spring, but several families that I worked with got little or no related services. So it was not uncommon for parents to tell me that well, she was supposed to get virtual PT, but the PT said, well, I don't know how to do that. So instead, I'm going to send you emails of things that you can do on your own. So there, and again, a lot of that just came from the unexpected nature of COVID and how it changed things for educators. But starting this year, when we should have a much better understanding what to expect, if you make a log like this and you're just keeping track of the service, so that would be like speech therapy, the name of the provider, the date, what time they started the therapy and roughly how many minutes. This is just an important tool for making sure that your child is getting the services that they are entitled to, and it ties into that compensatory education that Ashley talked about, because if there is a gap, if the services your child is qualified for are not being delivered, then that's important. That's an important evidence should comp ed be needed. All right, I think I did that as quickly as I possibly could.
You guys are doing really, really good. I am impressed. Justin, one of the things I love most about of what you were talking about is the progress monitoring. Those forms are simple. So I've seen some progress monitoring models out there that are very, very intense, even for people who do progress monitoring all the time. So parents who, you know, are trying to juggle work, childcare, being a teacher, I like the simplicity, and I think that can help parents keep it all together and actually do the progress monitoring, because it's not too overwhelming. So thank you for all the information you provided. One question that I'd like to go back to, because we do have 9 minutes left, and I do want to stick to the time frame just for everyone. I would like to go to Ashley. This is a question that I've gotten many times, and you touched on it when you spoke earlier, and I know we didn't have the time to really go into it, but Amy Eiton put it out there in the chat room. I'll just read it to you. Could a parent make a case for having the school system pay or help pay for outside therapists to come to the home if they are not able/willing to send their school-based therapist to the home? Or even a BCBA to help with a more successful remote learning experience? Could it be a needed parent training?
Yeah, so I think the short answer to Amy's question is yes. I think you could definitely make a case for that. I think, you know, maybe the first suggestion would be, could the IA from school come? And then if that's a no, or that's like not yesable, as I say, then yeah. And I understand the insurance things. Like one thing, you know, I think one of the reasons that Kelly and Becca are on the call is to think about things from the school's perspective. So like, you know, liability lady, if an IA gets hurt at your home, the school's liable. Schools have employment laws that they have to follow. They have to keep environment safe. Well, what if I've got like not me, what if Jack has taken the cover off of a vent in my house and somebody falls in that duct spot, the hole in the floor? I had a lady break her neck doing just that, going to visit a child. So you know, those kinds of things, like accidents happen, and they might not be allowed to allow that. But then what about if you allow somebody in your home? I think that would probably be considered a compensatory service, because if they just paid that person becomes an employee of the district, and that is, then they have the same liability. But if they would give you money for you to then hire somebody, or for even you to get paid to do it, I think that's a reasonable request. One thing you have to consider, though, when you think about that from the school's perspective, is how much do you love your child's aid? Because if they have to take the pittance of a salary that aid makes, like the $19,000 that the aid makes, and assign that to you for comp ed for this year or for this semester or whatever, that aid might have to get furloughed or even terminated. And so that might be something that you consider, of like, you know, being respectful to that person depending on your relationship. So then the last part of that is parent training. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge key. And so, you know, Gretchen had some really great practical tips, but if you need like behavior pointers, or if you need pointers in how to progress monitor, or you need pointers in instruction and reading, ask for it. Ask for parent training. That is funded in the law. And, you know, special ed money comes like in a pot, right? So like December numbers are due, or special ed numbers are due in Kentucky December 1st. And then they get their money for the next year. And then that money can be allocated to supplies and personnel and services and all the contract employees and all that stuff. So there's a spot of that of parent training. And as you probably have experienced, parent training doesn't maybe feel all that deliberate, because like, how often do you feel as though you've been trained by the district? A lot of times what they'll use that money for is to hire like an advocate for the school or something, which is great, but you know, are we utilizing them? So I think certainly that would be like a really easy thing to ask for, is like, well, could I get some instruction on fill in the blank, whatever you need? And I think behavior therapy is a great suggestion. I hope I answered that, Amy.
Yeah, that was great. Wait a minute, let me spell it myself. Okay, so just a few reminders. There's only like 4 minutes left, so I don't want to go into more questions, but I will review all of the questions that were submitted via email and the questions that were submitted in the chat room and respond to you accordingly within the next few days, hopefully within the next few days and not a week, but I can't make any promises. But anyways, I'll also be sending out, and I'll just send it to everyone who registered, the documents that Gretchen has, the documents that I have, and Dr. Dice's websites, and anything else that people send me. I think that'll be helpful to you parents, and you can pick through it and pick out what is appropriate for you and your child's school. I want to encourage you for this upcoming school year. Like it's just really, really hard for everyone right now. And I know everyone's feeling a lot of anxiety. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety. I'm sure Gretchen and Ashley are too, being that we're all kind of on the advocacy side of things. We want to help our families as best as we can. And we also want to work with the schools to try and make it the best, because they are trying. I want you to remember that most schools, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but most schools are really, really trying. And so I hope that you'll listen to Ashley's 3 R's that she talked about, and try to take those into account when you're approaching your school, and try to have a collaborative and communicative conversation. And you know, just a lot of communication is going to have to happen, especially if it's part virtual, and even if it's in person, you're just going to need a lot of communication. That's usually one of the biggest barriers that I see when I go into school meetings. You know, parents go in and they have their guard up, and after people start communicating, they're hugging at the end of the meeting. Well, we're not hugging anymore, but they used to hug at the end of the meeting. So just really try to communicate with your school team and be as collaborative as possible, because these are just really weird and crazy times. I want to thank you so much for registering, for coming tonight. We will see, you know, if there's another major topic that comes up that we want to do another one of these things, I might be hunting down some more panelists. But just keep paying attention to our information that we send out regarding upcoming classes and things like this, sessions like this tonight. And again, feel free to invite me to your virtual school meetings. Give me as much advance notice as possible, because I am getting a lot of requests, and would love to attend in-person ones with my mask on, or virtual. I did a bunch of those at the end of the school year last year. So thanks everyone. Thank you so much to our panelists. That was a ton of information in an hour and a half. And I really appreciate everyone's time. So you'll be hearing from me within the next few days over email, and feel free to respond with any additional questions. Thanks everyone. Have a great night. Bye.